What's the best meal you ever had that you will probably never get to have again? I went on a fishing trip with my brother and a couple friends down to Marathon in the Florida Keys. We took our boat, stayed in a tent in this campground, and there was a restaurant there with a Cajun chef named Frenchie. One day we had a pretty good haul. Spanish mackerel, yellowtail snapper, and quite a few fish we didn't really know what to do with. Frenchie saw our catch and offered a deal. Give him the fish we didn't want, and he'd take the rest and cook it up Cajun style with sides and everything. For free. Okay, drinks weren't free, but oh my god. A couple hours later the four of us were treated to a feast of epic proportions. Imagine one of those all-you-can-eat fish dinners but with fresh fish you caught that day. Cooked expertly by a real Cajun acting as your own personal chef for the evening. I worked on an archaeological dig in rural Italy when I was in college. One night, I was pitch black drunk hobbling back to our camp from the small towns only club when it began to rain. I tripped and broke my glasses right in front of a concerned elderly Italian woman's driveway. She yelled from her door to invite me in, cleaned me up, and served me fried rabbit with tomatoes, spaghetti carbonara, and a cappuccino. Her husband had been a chef and restaurateur for years before his death, and she had helped around the kitchen. When he died, so did their business, and her cooking for me was the first time she'd prepared a meal for another person in 2 years. Judging from her anecdote about feeding American GIs during World War II, she had to be at least 90, and this was in 2018. That meal simply will never materialize again. In any way, our family used to own a Chinese restaurant. My uncle woke up at 4 a.m. to make the noodles and to make Chinese roast pork. After he died, my relatives went with just getting noodles delivered from a factory. Our pork also didn't taste the same. I miss the food at that restaurant. There's an area in Rhode Island that has a bunch of old Italian restaurants that have been there forever. Something Hill, I think. I was there for work once and ate at one of them for dinner. It was legit the best meal I've ever had. Just the appetizer soup was probably better than any other restaurant food I've had. You could tell it was awesome family recipes that they've been making for generations. I'll probably never be in that state again. Those smiley face French fries from second grade, they sure hit different. Black ant egg rolls in Taiwan. Surprisingly, one of the best meals I've ever had. But who knows if I will ever return to Taiwan. Even if I do, I could never find that restaurant again. At this fair someone was selling $1 cheeseburgers and they were so much better than any other burger I had in my life. Any food my dad made, especially his curry. Stumbled randomly into a speakeasy downtown one evening and the bartender made me a drink with scotch in it that tasted like campfires and rain and wind and fresh moss and stormy skies. It changed me. Scallops. They were incredibly fucking delicious. Sautéed with garlic and butter. Perfectly cooked. Melt in your mouth. Unfortunately, that's how I found out I was allergic to shellfish. So I won't ever be having them again. Unless I'm ready to die. For me it's because the people who made them are no longer alive. But my grandparents' food, simple Mexican food that no matter how hard I try to recreate will never have the same taste or smell. And every bite filled you with an internal warmth that just made you feel like you were some important being. IDK, how to explain it? Even breakfast tacos. I remember waking up 2 hours before school to go sell them in his homemade salsa every day. Simple times. I was a broke student in Boston. I had like $4 to my name. I was fucking starving, so I just walked into a restaurant in Chinatown and just told the waiter that I had $4 and just wanted some lunch. He laughed at me, sat me down, and brought out the most delicious but simple food. It was chicken, with some green vegetable I couldn't identify, but it was dark and pungent, and a huge bowl of rice. I was almost in tears, it was so good. All equal. The first was the Antique Garage in Soho, NY. It was some sort of Mediterranean stack made from hummus, tomato, lamb and some other things. Incredible. Then we in Eleuthera, Francis Placaris made the best fish and stone crabs ever. The most simple dish. The following day we hopped his shitty sailboat with no mast and an 11 horsepower trolling motor. We were out in big waves and were hand-lining fish. We turned the boat back toward the dock and along the way, he went below deck and fired some weed. That motherfucker came up so baked his eyes were pointing 2 different directions. And that is the God's honest truth. He then made the best white fish we have ever had for lunch. And he was baked as fuck all. Any kind of food after having an operation. Because you've been fasting so long. That tea and buttered toast really hits different. Almost makes you cry in gratitude. This is one of my favorite stories. So, when I was 19, about to turn 20 in college, I was suffering from DKA from undiagnosed type 1 diabetes. Basically for several months my blood sugar was through the roof and I had all the classic symptoms. Extreme thirst, muscle cramps, bad sleep, peeing all the time, as I had been eating normally, and kinda in the excess of a 19-year-old college student. It wasn't helping and my body was unable to turn any of the carbohydrates or food into energy. Well, long story short, after I figured out I needed serious medical attention, I drove to the emergency room and got quickly brought up to the ICU. I spent the day in the ICU getting tested positive for diabetes and nurses began giving me insulin to get my levels under control. Late into the evening after having not eaten all day, and kinda technically for months, I desperately needed food. I convinced the nurses to get me something and they brought me one of those generic boxed meals they have at hospitals. It was a ham sandwich on white bread with mayo. It was to this day the single greatest thing I've ever eaten because for the first time in months, my body was able to actually use it. And somehow it tasted like that. My dad's amazing sandwich. Way back when I was little, he made this bomb-ass sandwich with ingredients you've never thought of combining. Like egg, sweet soya sauce, ketchup, bacon, corned beef, etc. I forgot the exact combination but it's so delicious. However, my mom got mad at him for making unhealthy shit meals for the kids. So he got dejected and never made it again. He's still here, but to this day whenever I bring it up, he says he doesn't remember and says I'm hallucinating. I'm not. It's so good that I kept remembering to this day. I wish my dad could remember the recipe. Sad face. I had lunch with Queen Elizabeth in 2005 and they cooked something that was sort of like rice but not rice. It was amazing. I have no fucking clue what it was and I've never seen it before or since. My aunt's wedding reception in Boulder, Colorado was at some 5-star restaurant tucked away in the mountains. It was by far the best food I have ever eaten. A McDonald's burger at 3 a.m. in southwestern Wisconsin. I was a cook for 5 years, so my palate is pretty varied. But I can say that this is the best burger I have ever tasted. I can't remember where I was headed, but I decided to go to the drive-thru where I was greeted by an almost high school-aged kid. Little did I know he would be the key to Flavortown. When I bit into the burger, my mouth was greeted by perfectly seasoned beef in a toasted bun. The meat was seared to perfection while remaining tender. The bun I could only describe as toasted while simultaneously dipped in au jus. I was stunned at how amazing it was. The second was a pan-fried, breadless pork tenderloin sandwich served in a super small town in Iowa. It was salted just right and had a little tiny bit of spice to it. It was seared on a cast iron skillet to perfection. The tenderloin head was juicy and tender. The bun, condiments, and the plate itself were dwarfed by the tenderloin. I'm going to try to recreate it tomorrow, but I know it's hard to recreate the taste of a different cast iron skillet. The cake my sister got for my 11th birthday. It was heavenly. I tried buying the same cake from the same store multiple times but it never tasted as good as it did the first time. I live in Washington State, I got a chance to go to Maine. Fresh lobster roll right out of the water, almost. First time having lobster too. A whole goat. I was a working guest for a fancy Saudi family and they butchered and prepared a whole goat one afternoon for lunch. It was served, in I guess halves, on two of the biggest plates I've ever seen, surrounded by mountains of rice and veggies. The whole thing was steaming hot and amazing after a long morning of working on horses. That whole trip was a whirlwind, but the goat was dope. As a side note, it was a weird place to be as a Western woman. But that's a different story. The hospitality is real, folks. I was in Istanbul on my own in 2015, and had gotten asked on a date by this vaguely hipstery Turkish guy around my age that sold me about $60 worth of Turkish towels. I was there for the second week of Ramadan, and decided to say fuck it and agree to go with him. Now, in and around the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia there are tons of people that have picnic and break their fast there. Just tons of kids playing, young couples out and about, old Turkish women and men sitting around in groups gossiping. This guy decided this was our best bet. He later told me he felt secure doing it this way, since he didn't want me freaking out by a random Turkish guy hauling me off into a random part of the city. He then proceeds to bust out plastic containers of Turkish food, all stuff his mom made. Literally some of the best food I've ever had in my life. So I broke this guy's fast with him with the best Turkish food I'll ever have in my life. And then we went and got tea service on a long hike in eastern Nepal. Some of our porters, mostly Tamang and Sherpa, were just 16 like me, and we chatted as much as a language barrier would let us. One time we arrived to a little village after a week of just the empty trail, and my new friends took me to a local hut that had a fire on just for the Nepalese working there, and an old lady cooking. In there they gave me a cup of hot rakshi and I tried some small bits of fried yak. Very chewy but really nice when heavily salted. That's an experience I don't think I'll ever get again. Skirt steak, sweet potato fries, large amber beer from a restaurant that is closed. I actually got to have it twice, because I went back later that week. My friend didn't want to since we were only there for a week. But I don't regret it. We were the first-year newcomers in SRM University, Chennai, India, 2015. My last examination for the first SEM was going to happen and I was in college hostel studying for the exam. I felt hungry. It was around 8 o'clock in the night. It was raining heavily. Cafeteria was not open and all the students who were there near cafe went to admin office, but that was also closed. I returned to my hostel, searched for the warden, and he was also not in his room, so I spent the night with only water. Next day we got the news that the area I was living in became the red spot for the Chennai floods. So, we didn't get to eat anything for 2 more days. There was only water everywhere and for us to get our stomach filled also. Army was deployed to save people, but we students were being ignored because we were living far away from the main city. It was the end of the 3rd day with no electricity, no food, and all of us were feeling cold. At 10 p.m. we broke some of our desks and got to the top of hostel and burned it. After 1.5 hours, Indian Air Force spotted me and 5 guys. We were carried by safety belt and suit via a helicopter to a safe place that was around 5 kilometers away, and was offered a PB&J sandwich with a cup of chai. This was the meal with a taste that I will probably never get to have again. A Puerto Rican dish called mofongo. It's essentially mashed potatoes made out of bananas. A sushi roll with rice, seaweed, salmon, fish roe, cucumbers, and eel sauce. The restaurant that sold it closed down. Sad face. I once ate this absolutely divine calamari meal in Greece. It was grilled calamari with side of Greek salad and drinks, and it was at a seafood restaurant right on the seashore on a hot summer evening. Someday I hope to visit again so I can find anything similar. Had it twice and never again anything like it elsewhere. I tried anything my grandma cooked. Right before my brother passed away, he was brought home from the hospital so he could live the rest of his life in comfort. One night I woke up to noises and a crash downstairs. I went to investigate and my brother was standing there in his PJs and slippers and a whole carton of eggs broken on the floor. We cleaned it up together and then made scrambled eggs. We ate it sitting on the table with beers even though he wasn't supposed to drink. That was my last meal with my best friend because 2 hours after I fell asleep next to him, he passed away. Now, whenever I feel lonely without him, I make myself scrambled eggs and beer and eat it sitting on the table. It was the tasting menu at a place called the Hardware Grill. I've had it twice in my life. Duck prosciutto. First visit, seared scallop trio, each in a different sauce. Second visit, lobster grilled cheese slider with tomato soup shooter. Beef tataki with truffle aioli and house-made chips. Mushroom pea risotto made with a vanilla cream. Bacon-wrapped elk steak with potato gratin pie. Roasted beets and seasoned veg. Butternut squash puree, mash. Chocolate lava cake with vanilla ice cream, caramel corn and cotton candy. They were 2 of the best 5 meals of my life. The restaurant closed last August. I've saved the menus to try and recreate them when I become skilled enough. But it will never be the same.